25 years, he says, of research on rural Southern black life and history. Again, as I said before, he is very passionate about black people, black heritage, and black history. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you Professor William Mackey, Sr. Thank you.
How you all doing this evening? All right. I'm glad that you could make it out again. I almost didn't. This lady, this young lady here, Miss Walker, she has a nasty habit of making me offers I can't refuse. Oh, thank you. And I came here from my college, Empire State, which is at 42nd Street. And obviously, if you know Midtown Manhattan, you don't go in there with a car unless you got $50 million and are prepared to have it banged up, and the guy says it never was him, but pay me anyway. So she told me there was no problem. I just take the number 3 train and get off at Van Sicklen, couple of short blocks. I thought y'all would enjoy that. Couple of short blocks and I'm right there. Well, naturally, you know what kind of weather, there's all kind of weather out there tonight. And when I got off at Van Sicklen, and 2 nice gentlemen, one Puerto Rican fella, another, they said, yeah, oh, you go right there, St. Paul, she's over the hill there. And I'm walking, and it's snowing, and it's raining, and it's glowing, and sleeting, and whatnot. And finally, I said, gee, I must be going in the wrong direction. Or maybe this dude didn't understand English too well. So in the meantime, I'm saturated, I'm driving, I get right in the middle of Linden Boulevard, and the snowstorm comes down on me. You know, if I could have caught this lady at that point, I don't know, you know. Eventually, I finally, with bleary eyes, somebody says, oh yes, right there. And I saw the sign that says, Jesus save, and I said, thank God. Well, thank you all for coming out on such a, I don't know what kind of night you call it. Well, it's certainly a night where we're having some of all kind of weather. And I have been asked to deal with this workshop primarily around 3 themes. I'll write them on the board. You know, I sure wish I had my young eyes again. I hope you all can see in the back better. Dignity, destiny, and divinity. We're going to try to link up these 3 themes. Oh,
you got chewing gum. You're riding the train. You got chewing gum on your pants.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm sorry. You see, it's good to have people looking out for you, because I probably would have laid down in that tonight. Now, and we're going to be looking at these 3 themes in light of our history, experience, and culture. Now, it has occurred to me, the usual rule we use here, for those of you who have not attended any of the lecture before, I'll probably talk about an hour, and then leave some time for you to ask questions. I hope you brought your clubs. You hit me over the head, but Georgia folks have very hard heads, so I hope you got a steel club. But you will have a chance. I encourage you to take notes or whatnot, and then we'll move on into your throwing something at me. But before we can discuss anything to make sense, we have to agree on the definition of terms. And so when we talk about dignity, destiny, divinity, if we go into Webster's or any other comprehensive dictionary, the first thing we note is that all 3 of these terms are something the European folks call nouns or names. And then you see noun A, and that's one definition of dignity, and then B, and then C. And by the time you get through each one of these groups, you've got about 3 paragraphs there, all supposedly defining one term and having different subtleties about it. So before we can even start talking about the theme, we need to have at least an agreement on the definitions, how we intend to use the definition. With all of these different kinds of concepts, it is one of the things that makes the English language so fascinating. It is also one of the things that is the reason, one of the main reasons that this country has one lawyer for every 400 population. Lawyers can argue around 3 points of what one word means all day. Take an appeal, of course, as long as the client's paid. So, you know, they argue and they forget all about your case. They get so caught up with the subtle nuances. Do I mean this to mean that? So first we'll start out by defining with you how I propose that we use the term here. One of the definitions of dignity, and this is the essence in which we'll use it, is the respect that is due an individual or people inherently because of their humanity, because they are people. There's another kind of dignity, you know, that may go inherently with a job. The President of the United States has an inherent dignity in his job. I really don't have too much respect for him on a personal level. But nevertheless, we say the dignity of the office. All kinds of men and women may occupy the office. It doesn't necessarily mean that they act in a dignified manner. So in the term in which we will use it here, to understand it here, I mean this to mean, in essence, the dignity, the respect of a people, us and them, Mose and Mosetta, you and me. What constitutes our dignity? What have we lost? How do we go about maintaining it? And what can we do, each and every one of us individually and collectively, to try to move ourselves into a more profitable future for those young people who are to come behind us? Ms. Walker mentioned earlier about this film on AIDS. This is one of the problems which is dealing with our community, which we have many. It is also one of the problems that if we don't solve, it will go pretty much down to destroy us. And when I say we, I mean just that. No group in this society, you can like this or not. I didn't make the history. A lot of it I wish hadn't happened. But I can tell you this, that if we don't do the job ain't gonna get done. Now that may be painful, we may go run and hide from it, but nobody else has a vested interest in our survival. Nothing in the last 500 years of our history should convince us that somehow by appealing to the goodwill, quote unquote, of those that we live among in this vale of tears, that somehow they really intend to do right by us as soon as they can find a way to do it. It ain't so. It ain't never been so. And I was born and raised a Southern Black Baptist, and believe me, I would not lie in God's house. I might make a mistake. Now this is the reality. Therefore, if we are concerned about a concept of the dignity of ourselves, we must then be willing to take the responsibility for enhancing that, not only in terms of how we live, but what we project on to our children. What do we mean by the sense of community? To say we live in the community, we need to examine terms and understand their meaning, at least in one sense. When, for example, when we use the word community, are we really describing a neighborhood? Because the two are not necessarily the same. A neighborhood is an area where a whole lot of people live together. But a community implies a closer, something else. People interwoven with others. When you have a community, there is a sense of interrelation. The concept each individual's dignity then depends upon the dignity of the whole. And to the extent the reverse is also true, that if any one individual's dignity is besmirched, by extension it affects the whole. The next thing we are looking at, of course, is destiny. The dictionaries generally agree that destiny is supposed to describe, in one sense, that aspect of our lives, which it says fate, kismet, preordained, something that ordained what would happen to us as individuals before we were born. In other words, we often say you cannot escape your destiny. We cannot escape your fate. But when we talk about it in a larger sense, when we talk about the destiny of a people, then we mean that in pragmatic sense, or should mean in pragmatic sense. How does the group en masse's behavior or attitude affect what happens to the group as a whole? In other words, actions taken or not taken. How do they affect what happens to us down the road? And within that sense, again, actions of the individual interrelating with the group can and does have an impact on this. Divinity, one of the definitions has to do with that which is divine, of God, of holy, sainted, sanctified, having not to do with secularly or of life. But then there's another definition that talks about the divine soul of each individual. Now, I don't propose to project theology on you. I'm not a minister. I've studied theology, but that you get on Sunday in your sermon. But nevertheless, I have to touch on it because it does relate in this respect. When we say that the human soul is eternal and divine, we are saying in essence that the soul is godlike. Not God, I didn't say that. But it transcends the physical limitations of our bodies. But we can also use it in a narrower sense, use the term, the divinity, the divine rights of a people, which actually should be the divine right of all people to live in dignity, in self-respect, in the sanctity of the person. We talk about that. And this is the way we mean to look at it here. When we look at it from another level, historically for our people, these terms have for the last 500 years have had tremendous dramatic meaning for us, both as how it was used among ourselves and how others, particularly those who abused and victimized us, used it. And since this is in a church, I think it would behoove us to begin to look at how that process came about. Some of you may find the remarks I'm going to make offensive, but again, I'm about truth as I see it. Just like I said before, when my grandma told me first thing Monday morning I'm going to get the peace video back, I didn't like that, but I knew that she wasn't telling the story because first thing Monday morning, that was the first order of business. It was truth, painful, but I knew there was truth. So you learn that sometimes in order to see the light, you have to go through a painful process, like a process of being set in through a forge, where the impurities are hopefully taken out and what is left is the pure metal. It would seem to me, based on our recent history as a people, and I say recent in the way that God looks at the world. I mean, what is 500 years in terms of God is just a second. But within that limitation, because in the beginning, going back to the 15th century, the people who decided to strip us of our dignity called themselves, by and large, Christians. And that created a problem for them. Because they found that their Christianity ran counter to their pocketbooks. Here you were with all this new land, quote unquote, over here, that you wanted to get the wealth out of and off of. After you got through killing the people or reducing them that owned it. And I assume that some of you are related to these people, the people that they renamed the Indians. At some point, they decided that they needed more and more labor. You know, if you've studied any of most of these semi-histories that they teach us to pass for history, they tried the indigenous people and that didn't work. Finally, in the middle of the 16th century, a Spanish priest by the name of Bartolomé de las Casas, who happened to be a very close friend of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, had this brilliant idea. Now you say, what has this got to do with dignity? Just bear with me. I use a broad stroke, but I think I tie up the loose ends. And he said to Charles V, look, we need to get the wealth out of this land. You couldn't expect the Spanish aristocrats to do it because they ain't used to work. Besides, they were too busy with the Inquisition, killing people that they thought were heretics. That's a full-time job. You know, slaughtering people is a very, very demanding job. This country's been at it for 200 years. Still doing it. So, therefore, he says, what I think we need to do, these people here have souls. We can Christianize them, convert them. But we need to go over somewhere where folks is different from us. Over here, where Moses and Mosetta is. They ain't got no souls. I'm quoting the man. They don't have no souls. Meaning they is savages, quote unquote. Now isn't this neat? Therefore, let's go get them and let them do the work because we don't have to let our consciences bother us. And this is what was done. But look at what is happening here. What we have happening here is a people who call themselves Christian, and I use that term advisedly, call themselves Christians. By their definitions, nobody bothered to look at the historical fact. And this may, of course, upset many of us because some of us become so turned around by other people's definition that we don't even want to look at the reality. But the fact remains that that Christianity, which they were purporting to be, was and still is an African religion. The oldest Christian church in the world is the Ethiopian Coptic Church, which goes back, as you know, Haile Selassie said that he was descended from the Negus all the way back to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. It was there while the Europeans or the people in Western Europe were swinging from trees and painting themselves with things and bashing each other over the head with clubs. So they were really Johnny-come-latelys to this concept of Christianity. But as is the way with thieves, and if you say, how could that be? You don't believe me? Just look at what has happened to our music and art right here. They're now saying, oh, jazz didn't come from Africans. Oh, that's European music. Check it out. And for those of you who say, well, that's the sinful world. Last year, the last 2 years, 3 years, when they do the Grammy Awards, they have 2 categories for gospel. Am I lying? They come up with something they call, quote, white gospel and black gospel. Now, if you buy that, all of y'all go walk around on your eyebrows. Within 10 years, these little children, when they come to think, will they know the difference? No, because these people tell them, yeah, well, you got 2 kinds of gospel. Ain't but 1 kind of gospel here. The word means, we brought it here. It came from our pain and them cotton fields and them cane fields and them tobacco fields. And yet we have reached a stage where we are honored when the thieves come and steal our culture and we say, right on. People do not maintain their dignity by allowing their culture to be ripped off from them. You see, there's other aspect. Dignity is a lot of things when we talk about dignity. It's not just that which is personal, individual, but it's all of that that goes to make you and I unique. One of the few things, now they'll always have to have white gospel. And that is because in order for them to get them rocks and stuff like, y'all do here on Sunday morning, y'all know what they got to do, right? They got to come marching in that door and say like you, but they ain't prepared to do that because they get very upset when they're outnumbered. They want the music, but they ain't prepared to come in your church to get it. So they say, well, I can't steal that because they ain't been in no cane field, but I can come up with something else that sound whiny and I call it white gospel. And then I come up with a category. And since I'm doing the defining, that's what it is. How does that affect the dignity of a people? You rip off an individual's culture. One of the first methods that I said earlier, and I repeat this because I think it should bear repeating. Any conqueror throughout history, whenever he came to conquer a people, did 3 or 4 things. First, refuse them the use of their language. Second, debase, rape, and dehumanize the women. Third, tell him your name is no longer Babaluba, your name is now George Jones. And fourth, what do I do with that? I substitute this because I must get these basic things, the essence that gives you yourself, your cultural dignity. If I can do this, then the ruler or the conqueror is doing everything that he can to control the destiny of the group. In other words, to project your destiny down a certain way, which is what he will want you to do. When we look at that period, now how these things started out, and I may not get through this tonight, but I just want to give you something to think about. So many things that happen to a people, that happen in life, really have to do with the accident of history of fate, or maybe it's God's plan, but we don't know why. One of the ironies, one of the cruel ironies of our situation today has to do with the fact, ironically enough, that the African slave trade, beginning in the 15th century and through the 19th century, paralleled exactly the rise of the Protestant Reformation in Europe. Now, most people in here say, well, yeah, I'm a Protestant. But when I question most of my brothers and sisters, they have no concept of what the word means. Well, it means to protest. Yeah, but protest what? This was a time of ferment, a time of breaking away from the then one church, the Catholic Church, which had become so corrupt that the popes and the archbishops went around in order to raise money. They sold you an indulgence. You could do whatever you wanted to do, and you say, okay, here, here's 4,000 or 5,000 lira. Okay, I give you a special indulgence. Go on out and do what you want to do. Now you say, how does that affect us, our destiny? Very simply this, because as a part of that, if you recall, if you've studied Bible history, whatnot, you know that among those monks, among the Catholic Church, there was a gentleman who later gave his name to one of our greatest black people, Martin Luther. And history tells us that he became so incensed with the corruption and the selling of favors by the church that on October 31st in 1517, he went to the cathedral at Worms, which was one of the major cathedrals at that time, and he nailed to the door 95 theses, accusing the church of all of these things of iniquity, something never heard of. A lowly monk is saying. In other words, clean up your house, or as young people today would say, clean up your act. Now, Martin Luther had no intention of starting a new religious sect. That wasn't his point. He was a reformer. All he was trying to do was call attention to the mother church of the excesses of which he had. But the church, being corrupt, said no. Luther then said, well, I cannot stay in an institution that allows this to happen. And that is how we got what they know as the earliest form of Protestantism, Lutheranism. In other words, protesting against excesses. 15 years later, a gentleman whose philosophy in the Protestant faith was to have dramatic consequences for us as a people, a young gentleman born about 13 years after Luther in Lyons, France, by the name of Jean Calvin, became a disciple of Luther, moved into Switzerland and founded what has come to be known to us as the Calvinist branch of the Protestant church. If you want to know who the Calvinist branch is, you have to look no further than Azania, which the Europeans call South Africa. Got your attention, didn't I? Because that's what they are. Calvinists. They are connected, of course, with the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists, and the Puritans, but the Calvinist branch was a particularly rigid part of that Protestant Reformation. Why? Because it was John Calvin who hammered home the concept of predestination. Put a PR in front of this. P-R-E. Preordination. And what that meant in concrete terms was the philosophy of the Calvinists, the Calvinist branch of the Protestant faith was, whatever position you found yourself in life was preordained by God before you were born. Neat, huh? Therefore, you had no right as a human being to protest against that condition, no matter how hurtful, how painful. Ain't that neat? Because there was nothing you could do about it. Nobody had a right to do anything about it because it was something that was ordained by the Great Spirit. And you should not complain about it. That is where he was the gentleman who coined the phrase, servants, obey your masters. And that concept was to have dire consequences for people of African descent. Because, you see, it gave the Protestant branch of the Christian religion the rationale to enslave their brothers. Can you all follow that? It's not my fault. You are a slave, not because I willed it. It was God who preordained that those ships should go and pack you in from Africa because that was your lot. And since that is your lot, there is nothing that I or any other power on earth can do about it. And you should not ought to want to do anything about it, because through the servant obeying his or her master, this will ensure that they will see God in the afterlife. Therefore, to the slave, your job is to obey your master. There was one gentleman by the name of Weston that preached a sermon. I didn't bring the book with me, to a group of his slaves. This was in Virginia. And this preacher, Anglican, said to these slaves in front of him, your duty, that God wishes you to follow explicitly everything your master tells you to do. God does not want you to talk back at your master. God don't even want you to get angry with your master. God wants you to protect everything the master has here, because in protecting that, you're doing the master's will, you is doing God's will. God also says that if you see any of your fellow slaves stealing anything from the master, or misusing any of the master's animals or cattle, or eating food that the master told them they couldn't eat, your duty to God is to tell the master on him. Because when you, as we say, snitch on him, God will put that down as a good mark for you. And when you get to heaven, he then might move you up a little higher. Right? So you might move up in heaven. See how they saw this thing? They saw heaven in the same terms of their secular earthly concern. You see, you move up from field hand to maybe house hand when you get to heaven, if you snitch on your fellow. Now, what has this done in terms of us? First of all, the attempt was made that the divinity, that essence, that godhood that exists in terms of the human spirit, was immediately said it did not exist. Can't exist, because you're a slave. And God ordained that. Neat, huh? It's a classic example of eating your cake and having it too. The other part of it was they didn't have to feel guilty at night. And that was a big part of it. In other words, I first say that God ordained this, so it ain't none of me. I then redefine you outside of the human family, so that ain't none of me. So I can be a good Christian while exploiting you, even beating and killing you. It's no problem, because I'm not beating a human being. You're not like me. Slavery is a beautiful thing for you. Oh yes, this is the history was said. Why? Because even though God has made you of an inferior clay, you will never be able to rise up to my level. However, out of the goodness of my heart, through the institution of slavery, I can bring you out of the jungle, where you barbarians were there cooking each other in the pots. No culture. And I bring you here at great expense to myself, sometimes great losses. I'm entitled to be compensated for that, you know. And I introduce you to my version of Christianity, which is like white gospel. And I will make you the best Christian, quote unquote, that you slaves are capable of being. Obviously, since God preordained you to be inferior, you can never be the Christian that I am, on my level. But I will raise you up to that bit, but I'm below me. And all I ask in return is that you give me your eternal loyalty, work for me from the cradle to the grave. Do not complain about it, because God wouldn't like that. And we will both be doing God's work. But think of you here in this institution now. And I want all of you to just consider this one thing, if you don't. Because sometimes I know people say, yeah, but he's talking what it means. I want to ask you something. Because I like to try to get people to think unthinkable thoughts. Because these people are constantly messing with our minds, or trying to 24 hours a day. And that means eternal vigilance. Let me ask you, do you really think that John Calvin or the captain on the slave ship had Jesse Jackson in mind when he was bringing his ancestors across here? What do you think would have happened if you had gone to one of them captains and says, hey, down the road, that man that you got in chains and that woman, they will have a son who will shake the very foundation of your society within the stem. What would the man have said to you if you said that? You're crazy. Am I right or wrong? This is one of the other things of destiny and the difficulty of destroying the divine soul of the spirit. Told you I would tie it all up. Then that tells us the other side of that pain that we just got through talking about, the other side of that John Calvin could not conceive of, because all Africans to him was down. Could he have conceived of a Martin Luther King Jr.? No way it could have got into his head. What about Marcus Garvey? No. Because according to this thing which was fixed and forever, immutably fixed in your predestiny, it was impossible for us to produce these kinds of individuals. And if they could not conceive of that, do you think that they could have conceived of St. Paul Community Baptist Church? See what I mean? This was not the Christianity, quote, that they had in mind for us. But we have always been, not because I say so, but because the history will bear it out. Check it out, as the young people say. We have always been a spiritual people. Sometimes, in my personal view, too spiritual, but that's an argument. We've always been a compassionate people, to our detriment many times, because we have been compassionate too often to the wrong people. How did we get enslaved in the first place? The Europeans did not come to Africa with guns. They didn't come there with blunderbuss. They didn't stand offshore, as they used to say, and fire away. That's not how they got there, because we had the numbers. They got there through our hospitality. Think of that. Because they didn't come there with no naval squadron. They came one or two ships looking for trade. You hungry? As I've said, well, yeah, y'all come on in. Have some, plenty more in the back there. Well, that's what we do. That's us. Down there in the backwoods where I come from, you come to visit somebody, you can never come the wrong time. Ain't you hungry? Yeah. Even if they done had everything, Johnny boy, go out there and catch that old frizzle-neckle hen out there. Wring his neck, so the next thing you know, you eating something. Go to our house here, you say, what you drinking? Don't even look like you want nothing to eat. Hey, there's this bar here. Just got it put together there, yeah. Now, brother, Yeah, I borrowed $30,000 for Morgan Guarantee Trust. Yeah, what do you drink? All these things here. I got my own body, all right? I don't drink. What's the matter with you? But this has been what we have been. This is exactly how them Calvinists got in Azania. Can we just stop here? Need to get a stop off here on my way over here to India. My folks is dying out there. They won't live. Can I just plant a little garden here? Right here. You don't need this land down here. That's the way it started. 1652. See, most of us don't even know this. I have people every time I lecture who ask me, well, what is it? How did they get there in the first place? We all should know that by now. And if we don't know it, we had better get out there, because you have the people here, the leadership here, Mr. Reagan and all of them, trying to make us believe as if these people have some legitimate right to be there. And if you don't know the history, how are you going to stand up and say you're lying? But we don't like to read books. At least too many of us don't. It takes too long. Yeah, give it to me in 3 quick sentences, and I get it down there. But no, can't do it the other way. And that's the only way that we learn. We need to look at all of it. As Minister Brown, and I want you all to thank him, he comes and he works very hard. He's one of the assistant pastors at Reverend Daughtry's church, House of the Lord. For some crazy reason, he's following me around, hoping, he's saying what I'm doing is important so we can begin to have archives. Not because it's me, but that's one of the things we have to be doing, which this church is doing. Because if you don't, once you go, the story is gone, and these people don't believe nothing that ain't documented. That's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the society we live in. So we need to have this so that when these children get up and they start doing research and whatnot, there will be things there for them to research. Not like when I was growing up and there was no place. I couldn't study black studies anywhere. I had to go to people like John Henry Clark, mentor, 6 months to get a book from Europe or somewhere. We need to inculcate our children. The most important thing they can learn is about themselves. Because without self, there ain't no dignity. Without dignity, there ain't no destiny. And obviously, the divine personhood cannot flower unless there is a sense of self. But we need to encourage ourselves you can't understand African history without looking at European history and American history, because it's all intertwined. We've got to look at it. And I admit, it's a hard job. My eyes are about to wear out, but it's a hard job, and there's no one person can do it. But it must be done, because to the extent that we don't do it, even when we are trying to be supportive to various struggles that are happening in the world, in the Caribbean, in Africa, and other places, we don't do it as well as we might, because we are missing ground, which reinforces that concept, which gives us the courage and the knowledge to know when we're right. When you're not sure, a slicker can turn you into the licks, But when you know who you are and what you are, nobody can shake that. Ye shall know the truth, etc. But if you avoid the truth, you're still in pain, and we get no closer to the solution. And I constantly have people ask me, what can we do? I heard that Reagan says he's working on positive engagement with them Dutch reformers in South Africa. He doesn't want to put sanctions on them because he would cut off a meaningful dialogue to try to ease the burden that is upon our brothers and sisters. If we buy that, we need to hop on one leg for the rest of our lives. See? Because if we say, yeah, that's all right, because we keep it, yeah, that makes sure you're going to work toward that. But that does not answer the basic question, which is, what in God's name are they doing there in the first place? See, that's the question. Nothing takes precedent over that. It's not even a question of whether they're going to give, quote unquote, democracy to our brothers. That ain't got nothing to do with it. This is our land. And they came in and they took it by force after we said, y'all come on in and sit at the welcome table. All right? Now here you are almost 400 years later saying, oh, when I come here, what nobody here at all. This was all vacant land. My answer to that if I came by here and it was raining and I saw the church door open and I came in here to get out of the rain, and when I came in here there was nobody in here. Think about what I'm saying now, right? Nobody in here. Okay? Obviously, well, ain't nobody in here. Nobody owned this place. So I go out and put a sign on there, William Mackey Jr. First Baptist Church. Huh? William Mackey Jr., pastor and proprietor. Does that make it mine, y'all? Does that give me any legal rights? And if I got up in front of a court and tried to maintain that, no, they wouldn't put me in jail. They'd put me in a straitjacket. Because they say I'm crazy. How then can we sit and allow these Europeans to sit there and try to make the case that when they come here, there was nobody there? Now, even if I thought they were sincere, the history of what they did to the people that they ripped off here would give the lie to that. Because once the English, the French, and the Spaniards and the Dutch decided that they wanted all these 3 million square miles of territory, the problem was there was about 10 million human beings out there living on it. And of course they were fighting over in Europe, and all they did was transfer them same fights here, still doing it. But the one thing they agreed on, we might fight over which one of us will rule it, but we must be absolutely clear on one thing. All land not occupied by white people is vacant. Oh yes, check out your history books. That's right. They agreed among that, the Dutch, the English, the French, Spaniards, and the Portuguese. So what that meant was, they now, what does this do to the so-called Indians? What did that make them? A non-person. When they redefined us outside of human family, say we had no souls, what did that make us? So since we ain't nobody down there, ain't nobody on the land. And as soon as they got enough guns and boats and technology there to make sure, but we're still asking questions, fundamental questions, which we should know. Because it ought to be clear to us, as it is to me, unless all people of African descent are free, none of us has our dignity. As long as any nation or group of people can with impunity besmirch the dignity or the destiny of one group, all of us are at risk. It doesn't matter whether we say, like some of us do, I ain't lost nothing over there with them old funny Africans. I ain't no Africans. I walk a lot in our community, and I hear some strange things come out of some of our people's mouth. No. Yeah, I don't talk to him because he one of them funny coconuts. I don't talk to her because she one of them crazy old geechers from South Carolina. I ain't black. I ain't lost nothing in Africa, and everybody in this room has heard one of these at least once. Huh? Well, part of our responsibility, if we talk about dignity, we have to take the bull by the horn. We have to try to lift these brothers and sisters' coat. We have to try to get them to understand that if you understand anything about the history of the slave trade, when them slave ships left West Africa, the captain did not come up to any of us and say, okay, now we have all of these places here. Where would you prefer to go? Let's see. If you like a bit more sunshine, we have Trinidad, Barbados. If you want a little more to the left of the equator, we have Brazil. Now, if you really want a moderate come sometime, we can give you Charleston, Savannah, Baltimore, etc., etc. Make up your mind there. We got all of these choices. Tell you what I'm going to do. Huh? All expenses paid. Get you back to the West Coast in time for spring 2 years from now. Don't worry about nothing, Charlie. We still ain't got back home. And I know some things I repeat, but I repeat them because I think it's important. I cannot see how a ship leaves the motherland with Mandingos, Yorubas, Quees, Ashantis, and it hits out here in this ocean. And somehow, by the time that ship gets over here to the West Indies, we suddenly done stop being Ashantis and Mandingos and whatnot. We is now West Indians. But only the ones who stay. When they change ships and they put some more zip, and then they bring it up here, then we become Negroes. The same ethnic group left the motherland. But they raised their magic wand, and from then on in, we don't never get back to calling ourselves what we is, what they tell you. And if you see, as I've said before, here is India over here. Huh? He makes you blind, you can see that. And here is the so-called West Indies over here. About 20,000 miles. Yeah, sure. Imagine. Now, where was Columbus headed? He said he was going to go here by going this way. And he would have got there. But he didn't know that big long land was there. You know, if he'd had somebody to carry something over about 500 or 600 miles, he'd have got to Mississippi. But the dude said, it's got to be in here. New Delhi is right over there. This is the western part of the Asian continent. Where's my map maker, my cartographer? Get out the map. Mark this down as the West Indies. As I told you all before, the dude had to lie. Queen Isabella, see, things don't change. Queen Isabella and Ferdinand had invested in that trip because they was expecting beaucoup gold and 1,000% profit. That was the whole reason they financed the trip. Now, how was he going to go back to Seville and say that again, please? I didn't make it, y'all. But I was on my way, you know. But I ran into a little problem down there, Your Majesty. But as soon as I could dig the Panama Canal, yes, I'm going to get over there. But see, the Panama Canal had to wait a couple of 100 years, right? But I'm going to do that. No, Chris did what hustlers always do. He lied. He told one of these dudes, put on your full regalia. The guy with them feathers and whatnot. Ain't nobody in Europe ever seen nothing like this. Nobody seen that, young. Put on the ship, got a few gold trinkets and whatnot. Do me a right. Got on the ships and headed back. Got back to Seville, sent a messenger ahead, tell the queen I'm here. And as he marched up the main street up to the palace, you can just see him now. People lining up. Chris is home, y'all. And here's that whole entourage of these people with the paint and whatnot. Lord, oh, Chris done been to India. Chris, where y'all been? Yes, ma'am, I went to the western part. Yes, in the West Indies part of India. I'm going to New Delhi tomorrow. As soon as you can refinance me another trip. I had a few problems out there I didn't realize, right? And as I said before, well, what was Queen Isabel going to do? Go tell a helicopter pilot, go rev up my gunship and let's go over there and see where Chris been? No helicopter. No maps. Well, Chris ran that game, got away with it twice. The third time when he came back there and he didn't bring back, the Queen said, is this all you brought me, Chris? Boom, into the dungeon. He died there. They don't tell you that. Yes, that's right. Put him in the bottom of the dude died. He admiral of the ocean sea in the bottom of the dungeon because he didn't come through with the money. Drake and all them other thieves, they reaped the benefits. But the legacy of this, how we still use these other terminologies, which has absolutely no relevance to us, historically, culturally, ethnically, or otherwise, and rename ourselves very conveniently because these people have decided that this is what they need us to be. And we are still arguing over this. Can you imagine this? My next birthday, if the good Lord's will and the creek don't rise, I'll be 68 years old. And there may be a few people in here who are my age who can bear witness to this. When World War II broke out, I was a young, virile guy. Y'all know it's hard to believe that now. I was young. One time, I had so much hair up here that my grandma used to have to lock my legs, head between her knees, call me, crying, boom. All gone now, no problem. But I'm still here. Thank God you don't think with your hair. Because I'd be in trouble. And a whole lot of y'all be in trouble with all that goose and stuff and them jerry curls too. But I loves me. I just wish God would have given me some hair like straw. I loves me, but I just wish he would have made me a little lighter. I was riding here all the way from 42nd Street to there, I kid you not. There's a beautiful sister, high cheekbones, real dark satin skin, and she was sitting on the side of me. And this child sat there all the way, and she was still on the train when I got off at Van Sicklen. Sometimes we ought to watch how we behave sometimes, And this child, the whole time she was... and she was reading the Daily News, and then she says, no, it can't be right. And I was sitting across from her, and and I'm watching this, and sometime because the devil gets in me, but these young folks kill you, you know what I'm saying? But I wanted to say, if it bothers you that much, go get a clean head. You know what I mean? But now, this was not something that she was doing consciously. But it's a part of that whole turnaround trick bag that we have allowed ourselves to get caught up in. Other people's standards, other people's values, and they don't never work for us. We still playing catch up after going through all of these changes. Some of us are still stupid enough to want to run out there and live. I was the only black that's living in my neighborhood until them crackers get mad one Sunday after night after drinking too much. And there go your house and you and everything else. Nobody, no other group in this society does that but us. Now, I'm not saying the people in this room, but I'm saying no other group in the society does this, but every other group, when they look, they want to see people who talk, who look, or have the same culture with them. And we running like the devil because we don't want to see no more than, y'all need to come. And then he looks around and there's the white guy saying, y'all need to come. People who respect themselves, their dignity, their destiny, do you behave this way? Well, tell me, yes or no. Is that a way we behave? Not only this, our children see us when we do this. Monkey see, monkey do. We give them the standards. Just like little girls will very early put on their mama's dress and shoes and stand up, shoes too big, whatnot. Little boys following their papa. How are we going to say that our children will imitate us when it comes to these kind of things, but they won't imitate the negative aspects of our behavior? Children are like sponges. Those of you who are parents know that. They can absorb everything. Their minds go in 50 million different directions at once, even while they're playing. So they have no problem with that. And then 20 years later, when the kid is standing up there, a young man or woman, asking whether or not I want to be black. Read some of those letters to the editor of Ebony magazine if you think I'm lying. It's tragic. I don't see no point in maintaining my blackness because there ain't no future in it. This was one in Ebony 2 months ago. Now, what choice does anybody in this room have? How you going to be something else? I mean, how you going to be something else? I met a former colleague of mine at City College about 2 years ago downtown, and he says, yeah, I saw you on TV about 3 weeks ago. You still into that old black mess? Now, that dude's about 4 shades darker than me, and that ain't hardly possible, right? Yeah, well, I was into blackness in the 60s. You dig this? It's a style or a fad. He was into it in the 60s. But that wore out now, so he's into something else. So I said, man, you are indeed a miracle. How you managed to do that? But the human mind is a fantastically complex thing. It can do all kind of funny things, you know. And once it messes you up that you lose your self-respect or your ethnic or cultural self-respect, you've had it. Because if you refuse to be what you are, then you have no choice but try to find something else to be. Which means you got to go around and ask somebody, can I be y'all? Now, given the nature of how we got here, all them other folks says no. The Italians don't want you because, after all, they're our first cousins anyway. You know, the people in northern Italy says everything south of Rome is Africa, and they mean that. Look at them Sicilians and Neapolitans the next time you see them. So they yell at us, nigger, 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 to keep people from looking at them. The Spaniards don't want us because we conquered them for 700 years. That's how come they're darker than all the other Europeans. Do they want to be reminded of that? No. Now, we know that the Anglo-Saxon Teutonic Nordic folks are the most culturally egocentric, racist-oriented group of people in the whole universe that God put on this earth. They're the ones that gave us the Ku Klux Klan. They're the ones who gave us lynching, plantations. And you know, one of the biggest problems, social problems they got in England now is they mad because, as I said the other day, all the Jamaicans and the various Caribbeans are coming in and say, go on back where you come from. What you doing here in my country? The Jamaican dude say, hey man, you always say you me mother. Me hungry man. So, me come to me mother. Didn't have that in mind when they were going there offering us them free excursions down through the holiday and whatnot, right? But this is the thing of history, the complex. Those the things that you cannot figure. Now, they thought they were putting our destiny together. But destiny has turned around and boomerang on them. You go, how many of you are aware that the port cities of Liverpool and Bristol was built on the African slave trade? All of the ships, or most of the ships, well, there were some built here, but as far as the English shipbuilding industry was concerned, Liverpool and Bristol, where the ships were outfitted, the leg irons, the chains, all of these things, the bricks, these were made there for us. They were made then into Africa, the triangle of nature, as we said before, and then back around again, right? These two cities became multi-wealthy cities. They brought in, they grew from little Blackwater port towns for fishing boats to multi-million pounds industry by the middle of the 17th century. Because, see, the English being thieves, they decided they would just take over the slave trade because there's money in it, and they did. But they did not know that one of the results down the road, when they brought us and dumped us in the Caribbean, they intended for us to stay there. They did not intend that there would be no trips from the Caribbean to England. But a few years go around. Do you control his destiny? No. Here's Enoch Powell, one of the worst of them, saying, I don't want them here. Actually, you know, these niggers, they have no business here. What were you doing in Africa 300 years ago? Did we send for them? Huh? No. So you want to play the game, or you want to commit the crime, now it's time for you to do the time. And you're turning around and saying, what is y'all doing here? What was you doing there? If you had left us with our culture and our whole concept intact, there would have been no problem. There would have been no crack, no AIDS, none of this garbage. You know, sometimes I get so enraged, you know, when I look and I see the waste that come upon our people, and we are producing ever more gorgeous young people, and you look at the waste, and as angry as you get, and as frustrated as you get, ultimately, historically, all of this leads right back to the beginning of these people deciding to suddenly, because it was economically feasible, and because people were naive or comparing cash, to read whole millions of people out of the human family. And it always boomerangs on them. Maybe that's part of God's predestination, I don't know. Because he don't tell me what his plans are. But I observed the phenomenon. They gave syphilis to the so-called Indians and the Africans, and they almost wiped these people out. And then God threw the bubonic plague on them, almost wiped them out. Plus they also had the syphilis, the venereal diseases, which they brought with them on top of that. We were thrown into slavery. And after that, a whole half existence in the twilight zone. All of this for gain, for superiority. And yet I looked down in my native South last week, and I watched poor redneck crackers running around, stumbling all over themselves to shake Jesse's hand. Why? Because in spite of all of this is going behind, they have not benefited anything. You've got these people there down there, they're starving. The farmers out west, the land that they declared that the Indians were none people to take. Now they're out there doing what? Blowing their brains out. Some of them killing the wives, kids, and all. The banks say, hey, no more money, here come foreclosed, goodbye, slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. And it was them banks that about 10 years ago that encouraged these farmers, hey, this prosperity is going to last forever. Come on down, improve your equipment, get this big $50 million tractor here. Dollar down, dollar when I catch it. No big deal. Now the bubble is burst and the sandbag is saying, I want my money. Yeah. Huh? And all them other candidates are being slick. They wasn't going to discuss no issues. Huh? Talk about destiny. But Jesse came in the beginning. He was the only one that talked about what we do, compassion, dealing with it. And as Willie Nelson, whose cracker credentials are impeccable, said, hell, Jesse Jackson's the only one that's saying anything that makes sense. These people are catching hell out here in Texas. You think about what I'm telling you. So here you got a case where the great-grandson of the slave master is running like the Dickens to try to get some help from the great-grandson of the slave. Thank you, sir. I think I've harassed y'all long enough for one night. Give you a little time to ask some questions or hit me over the head if you want to. You can come up and do whatever you do with the questions. Ain't you going to monitor this, you know? Well, I haven't read it yet. I haven't read today's paper. I'm teaching all day. What do you mean?
Comparing the Irish, the black struggle with the Irish struggle.
Uh-huh.
Have something in common.
Oh, yes. Well, you know why? I'll say, yes, we do have something in common now. And I'll tell you what we have in common. And he's correct. What we have in common. Oh, he said that he saw in this morning's paper, I assume it was said, that Cardinal O'Connor made a comparison of the similarities between the black struggle for a place in the sun and the Irish struggle, and that they were very much alike or part of the same thing. And I said I agree with Cardinal O'Connor, and they are the same thing to him now, because we are out there making our move. How many of y'all can tell me, are you any of you in here aware of the draft riots in New York of the Civil War of 1863? The draft riots. Hey, children, they ain't teaching y'all these things? Ain't y'all studying New York history? Oh, they didn't tell y'all about that, huh? Okay, what did they tell you? Yes? Which whites? Which ethnic group of whites? Thank you. Y'all hear what the young lady said? Now, here's the kick in the teeth. The majority of those Irish who got out in the streets in 1862, and they took over New York for almost a month. They brought out the National Guard. That couldn't stop them. They had to bring the army out. The police, of course, joined them in beating up on us. Yeah, New York's finest. Now, why y'all think they done that? How about that? Now, ain't that amazing? Even though they done swore an oath to uphold the law impartially, when they saw O'Malley with his brogue, they threw down the club and said, "Lead me to the niggers." And the horror of all of this, the overwhelming majority of the Irish working class and poor in New York City in the 1860s were the remnants of those who were lucky enough to get away from the potato famine in Ireland of 1840s. When that potato famine came into Ireland in the early part of 1842, there were 8 million Irishmen. And by 1848, when around, there was only 2 million left. And about 3 million immigrated, most of them here. And the kick in the teeth is the starvation wasn't even necessary. You see what happened? The English, of course, those same folks who gave us our names, among other goodies, they don't play favorites. They control Ireland, and the Irish had to plant only cash crops that the English lords could make money off. And they allowed them a small little plot right around their shack. Many of them lived, as they said, they lived worse than we did at that time under slavery. Can you believe that? Because we at least had a shack. They were digging in holes and hills. Last time I looked, the Irish were white, straight hair, blonde, blue eyes, thin lips, thin noses. So were the English. So because of over-replanting, this blight came along in 1842. It started. And the crops would start out looking like they were going to be a good potato crop, but before they got grown, it would wilt and die and black out. The Irish were reduced to cannibalism in many cases. This is documented history. One man, his wife died on her way to Dublin to try to get some help from him. She was sick, and she died on the road. And he stood and he watched her, and after he said that final Hail Mary full of grace, I hate these damn modern things. See? Y'all please forgive me, it won't happen again. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten in about 12 days. As he later testified in court, I got this all documented. I go down some strange road because I'm crazy, you know. And he said to the Lord High Justice, says, Your Honor, he says, I stood and I was watching her, and I said to myself, she feels no pain now. And there I was, Your Lordship, sitting on the side of the road, and I was hungry, and bejesus me, stomach was rubbing me backbone. So I says to myself, says I, the good Lord above wouldn't mind at all if I just took off one shoulder to keep me body and soul together, you know, and that's what it did. And while he was sitting there turning his wife's shoulder on this spit, the constable came by, and he could cook it, and they arrested him for cannibalism. And in one case where the judge had compassion, they let the guy go. But there were many documented cases of where these people literally, if you read Sean McMahon's story of the Irish race, it's all there. And these were white folks doing it to white folks, their cousins, the Celts. There's a story, if you don't believe it, there's a story in Friday's Times. See, everybody seems to understand this, but Moses and Mosetta. Who is getting up raising a stink again? Where you hid my, oh, I got it. You say, what's a Welshman? All we know most about Welshmen is that nursery rhyme. Taffy was a Welshman, Taffy was a thief. Taffy came to my house and stole a side of beef. Right? Now, Edward I, back in the 13th century, went in and conquered Wales. The English, Anglo-Saxon, right? At Carnarvon, the Welsh have been fighting and plotting against the English from that day to this one. Last week, if any of you got the Friday's Times, I have the article here. The latest thing is the Welsh have formed a group of young people called, guess what? Black Panthers. I kid you not. And what do you think these Black Panthers do? Now, when you go out of England into Wales, there's no river or ocean, right? It's land. This part is the Welsh borders, and this is England. But the Welsh know which side is Wales and which side is England. So these English people have been coming down in Wales, putting their summer homes and all these things down. So what do you think the Welsh has been doing? Say that again? Burning them up. Shooting them. They outlawed. Remember I said about language. The English, Cromwell outlawed the Welsh language. Only English could be taught in the schools. The Welsh have now finally, 5 years ago, they started to raise Cain, and they got their language back. after 700 years. Now Welsh is taught in the school. See, when you conquer people, it's very funny because the English had all the road signs in English only. The Welsh now says the road signs has to be in both English and Welsh. And of course, what the young Welsh Black Panthers do, as soon as they put up the road sign that says Brooklyn in English and whatever the funny thing, because the Welsh will throw 50,000 consonants together and pronounce every one of them. And nobody can do it but them. Okay? But what they do, they come back and take the English sign down and then take and point it somewhere else. They had Englishmen going off of cliffs. That's right. And there's this young man, there he is. He done been in jail God knows how many times. Firebrands versus linguists in the land of the Griffin's Whale since 1200. And we talk about we want to integrate. Now bear in mind, these are neighbors, cousins, occupy the same landmass. The Welsh are determined, and right now there are 3 million Welsh. And less, I think the figures are something like around 20% of them speak the language. But they are determined, and their children are going to learn it. There's something else they got in common. They're great singers, you know, these Welsh. They have these great choral groups and whatnot. So when you look, it's us. Now, so when you get back to these Irishmen and what you're saying about O'Connor, the English refused to allow them to grow something else to eat while this famine was going on. So they died, or they immigrated to come here. 1848 was about the last time the big ship, by that time it was over, someone's right. And we're talking about what, 15 years? 15 years later, them same Irishmen were out in the street beating up on every black person they could find in New York. And they spent burning down, they burned down an orphan home on 43rd and 5th Avenue, burned it to the ground. Little children, fourth floor orphan home. And what happened, the Irish men went inside and chased the kids up to the roof. And when the kids jumped off, the women down on the street cut and slaughtered and stamped them to bits. So I don't think that our struggle has quite been parallel. You know, but I can appreciate the kind of thing. So if we didn't know history, you know, and it was all because that they did not want to serve in the army, because as they said, this was an Anglo-Saxon dominated country. And the double insult was to be called into the army to fight for an Anglo-Saxon dominated society, and as they stated, quote, and I'm quoting them, for the benefit of some stinking niggers was too much for any self-respecting Irishman to take. And if we had continued to lay down and wait for these people to change their mind about treating Cardinal O'Connor or no one else, when you raise your conscience, other people raise your conscience. If you saw yesterday's Times, all of a sudden this is the same Jesse Jackson that the Jews accused of Town. Last time I looked, Jaime was a very popular and respected name. Anybody here know how you spell, what's the Spanish name for James? Jaimes, right? How you pronounce it? Thank you. And it was the Hebrew form of James, Jaime. So how could Jesse, by calling somebody Jaime, you don't know history. People can run any other kind of game on you they want to. And I'd like to quote my friend Minister Brown here, if I may. He was telling me the other night at the church, his church, Reverend Daughtry, of course, made a statement praising or relative positive about Jesse. And there was this young Jewish man who was a colleague of Minister Brown. And this is the kind of nerve that these people have for us, contempt. And after he said, I don't think, words to the effect, I don't think I can go along. I hope I'm doing it justice, Minister Brown, because I think go along because after all, his feelings of Jesse Jackson, because Jesse Jackson supports the PLO. Whereupon my learned colleague said, look, I've known you for a long time, we've been friends, but I have to tell you the risk. Israel is not a supporter of South Africa. It is a collaborator of South Africa. It is involved in all of the things and furnishing the guns, etc., which I use to kill my people in South Africa. So what are you telling me? Now, why should I care about Israel? I care about my people. Nobody expects them to care about me. But again, we've been programmed that, hey, because our leaders are afraid to say, or some of them seem to be, that the major industrialists in South Africa are Jews. The people that control the diamond industry in South Africa are Jews. The people that control the gold industry in South Africa are Jews, which means that this is the largest gold and diamond reserve in the world. And I hear you say, but how many of y'all walking around with diamonds or gold on you? Because every time we buy that or use it, we are helping them people drive a nail in the coffins, our brothers and sisters. We need to stop it. We need to make a political issue out of it. It's not just say, I ain't going to wear diamonds or gold, but to make it a political thing so that they understand, so it's economic. Go on 42nd Street. How many blacks do you see in, who runs 42nd Street? Jews. Well, how does that make me anti-Semitic because I say that? That's true. When the boycott was on, it wasn't very effective, but at least they went through the motion of boycotting South Africa. You all remember back a few years ago. The only Western nation that didn't even pay it lip service was Israel. Now, one of the other things that Israel and Azania have in common, along with Japan, is they are countries that do not produce any oil. South Africa, as the Europeans run it, is an industrialized nation, which means that nothing moves without lubrication, that's oil. So during this embargo, Israel had the contract for getting oil. So all Israel would do, instead of ordering 4 tankers, she'd order 10. 4 tankers would be used for herself, the rest would be transferred into Israeli vessels and go on to South Africa. That's during that whole embargo. South African industry didn't fall back 1 point. The wheezy weapon which the South Africans are using against our people in Angola is manufactured in Israel on money which is welfare that your taxes give Israel. We give the Israeli government $25 million per day in welfare. How many of y'all knew this? What I mean by that, it ain't a loan. They don't have to pay it back. Anybody else? Hey, I'm letting off early tonight. Well, good people, I'm sorry, excuse me. I knew I couldn't get away. I knew somebody, yes, sir. Will you stand up and face so the people in the back can hear you, please? Come up to the mic, please. Well, no, because otherwise I'll just have to repeat it, and I'm tired. Just stand, okay? Right.
It seems that other cultures or other groups, they have maintained or upheld their culture by giving different activities. So, for instance, the Jews, they go to shul and they perpetuate their culture by teaching them different facets of their culture. And we have been designated 1 month out of the whole entire year, Black History. And most of us, we don't really abide by it because we still do the same things that we normally do. We go to work and whatnot, and we carry on business as usual. And our kids, they come to me, because I teach history, and they ask me, so, Mr. Murray, should I stay home? And if I say, yes, you stay home, then they get involved in their video games and whatnot, and they really don't get into their culture. And although there are a lot of activities around the cities, they're not aware of these activities. How can our community perpetuate our dignity, our destiny, and our divinity, how can we perpetuate our culture? How can we have teachings? And how can adults who go to work, who do the things that they normally do, but yet and expect their kids to grasp the idea of their culture and their heritage on their own when they don't have direction because they don't see their parents doing it? How can we do something for them?
That'll take. It's a long. No, I don't have all night. You may have all night. First, I'd like to put that in a little perspective, my mate. And I certainly agree with you in terms of the need for perpetuating our cultural heritage. I assume everybody heard the question long. But when I was your age, I think I may, we had what they call Black History, Negro History Week, which was 1 week in February, the shortest month in the year. Now, I'm not using this for justification, because it seems that sometimes there's so many things that we don't seem to be able, as a group, to agree on certain fundamental things. One of the things that happened in World War II, I remember when the Pittsburgh Courier and all the black newspapers used to run they had a slogan, if you can believe this. And they ask you on the front page, what do you want to be called? Check one. Negro, Afro-American, colored. Black didn't even make the scene. Now, I say this to say this, the way I see it, and as I have experienced it, I have no objection to copying something that works somebody. Remember, the fundamental way in which Jews perpetuate their heritage, and as a persecuted people, I understand this, and I think if we wanted to imitate something, we could do well. They don't put the responsibility for the continuum of that heritage in the synagogue or in the school. It is in the home. The most important Jewish holidays, and remember the word holiday means holiday, are celebrated home. The Seder, when the father sits and he asks those 4 questions, next year, you are inculcating the basis. So what the shula does, in essence, or the yeshiva, is put the finishing touches on the essence. But the child is inculcated with his or her Jewishness from the time that they're old enough to understand the difference between a yarmulke and a cap. Now, it is my view that in order to project this to our children, we don't need to be historians. We don't even need to be literate. Now, you say, but no, and I'm not saying something against literacy. But again, I always go back to my own experience because this is the most profound experience to me. My grandmother, you've heard me say, my grandmother who raised me from the time I was 3 was a slave until she was 10 years of age. As a matter of fact, all the black folks that's the age I am now in the community I grew up in had been under the gun, and they had the scars to prove it. But I never met a person or a group of people that were more conscious of their heritage. You understand what I'm saying? As black people, I always was told, the first thing they teach you, don't trust Charles White if you want to survive. Because them people didn't play in Georgia. Ask anybody who grew up down there, They was very serious. But the concept, she would sit me down at night. This way, when I tell people this and I share, this woman made me a historian. And I taught her to read and write when she was 92 years of age. Because every night when our chores were done on that farm, she would sit me down in front of the fireplace and she would tell me things of history. And she'd say, me to tell you these things so you know what we can overcome. We have, us Gullahs, we sound like we Caribbeans, maybe that's what, but don't fool yourself, but because the same people anyway. But the other thing, she would question me, what you learn in the books today? And now, you know, they had that standard Georgia history, how wonderful it was doing slavery, and how the blacks just loved dancing around and fanning Mas and Miss and playing with the mint julep, and how everybody, you know, and everybody was singing Old Black Joe and love and whatnot. And the old lady would listen and she'd say, no, that ain't the way it been. And then she would lay it out to me. So when I went to school, you see what I'm saying? I was already primed for the fact. I also had a fantastic black teacher. The lady taught my mother before she taught me. Taught school in Camden County, Georgia for 60 years. And when she retired, she's only making $30 a month. So you know it had to be a labor of love. But she would tell you, these are the history books that the state of Georgia says you must have. And every time we went one, she would tell us which was the real and which was the different. So what I'm saying is that this church can act like what we're doing here as an extension. But the fundamentals must come from within the home. It might be that an individual child might, through osmosis or something, just out of curiosity, become part of a culture, to be curious. But if that home is not a place where the child is encouraged through activities of the parents, the most important thing, I think, through the parents' things, and develop certain things which can also be done in the home and by extension in the community, and by that going on. I think that is the way to go. Now, the other problem is see, we are people that's very impatient. We don't like long-term planning. But when you're talking about a people's heritage, remember slavery lasted 500 years. And we are not going to undo that legacy, however much we want, in 2 or 3 or 50 years. It would be nice if we could, but we've got to be prepared, I believe, for the long haul. And there's going to be a lot of sacrificing down the road. But we must do the things that we have it within our power to do. It's like I said about us in jewelry. If we will not refrain from wearing those little trinkets that we know is causing our brothers to die in them horrible mines in South Africa. Now, nobody can force any one of us to go out and buy a diamond ring, right? Or a diamond engagement ring, or a gold ring. Nobody can force you to do that. And if we say, well, I like this, if I'm not willing to do the things which cost me nothing in terms of inconvenience, how then can I say I'll lay down my life for you? Because if I say it, I'm lying. And this is another thing about it. We've become people of instant gratification. We are, quote, a nation of consumers, users. And it seems to me, your question is pertinent, but in the situation that we are now, it seems to me we have no choice but to jump on our horses and ride off in all directions at once, however impossible that may seem, because the problems are that complex. We no longer have the luxury of saying, I'll deal with this one, or deal with the church. We've got to deal with them all, somehow. Dollar comes into our community, and thank God St. Paul's is a refreshing exception of what we can do with our money. But in the average, dollars come into our community and goes out. And all the other community, it circulates at least 12 times. Part of that 12 times provide jobs for these young people. It provides school and things for these young people. Every ethnic group looks to husband its resources and bring them into the community. We have been programmed party time, 50 million dresses or pants, and you can only wear one pair at a time. Luxury automobiles, regardless of whether our income will secure it. I would rather buy the economy car. If you want to do something with the money, set up a scholarship for some child that's got something to need it. That is what keeps other groups also do that. We don't have one hospital is run by us in New York City. The only place you find we don't have one institution of higher learning, nowhere above the Mason-Dixon line. You want to send your child to a black college or university, you got to send them down home. And why are they ours? Because when we came out of slavery, what did the white folks in the areas say? We ain't got no money to spend for no educating no niggas. So where did we go? The church. We put them out, the church. Every Sunday, every pastor day, that was that little collection, the penny for this, that, and the other, and bit by bit, we built Johnson C. Smith. We built Edward Waters College. Mom Bethune, Mary Picard Bethune got out and walked all over South Carolina and Georgia to build Bethune-Cookman College. Savannah State. That's how we built up an institution. Out of our churches as our survival institutions. And now here we are, God bless the mark, some of us, oh, well, I want to be an Episcopalian. Huh? Or United Methodist. We don't even stop to ask what it is and what are we giving. And I have nothing against religion. But you look at these people, the Methodists want to unite with the AME when all of the whites left the inner city. And when they looked out on Sunday morning, out in the place, they didn't have 20% as many people as in here tonight. So just like the Irish has suddenly discovered that our struggle parallels theirs. Huh? The Methodist Episcopal Church discovered, hey, them AME folks all right, let's unify this thing. Now what this meant was we mixed out a little bit, then they got the money, they do the accounting. Huh? We forget. How did the African Methodist Episcopal Church start? Because Richard Allen and Absalom Jones way back in the 18th century was praying in a white church in Philadelphia. And what did they come and tell them? Yeah, you can't pray down front here. Go in the back. And they said, no, I will not worship my God this way. I will go out and I will build my own. That was our first church. Right after that came First Baptist and Andrew Bryan in Georgia. George Lyles furnished the Baptist church in Jamaica. See, I do my homework. Because I don't know what kind of tricky questions y'all going to ask me here. But all of the history indicates to me that we need to look at this institution that we call the black church. And of course the people here has no problem. The people who need to hear this ain't coming in here. And that's the tragedy. But this black church serves not only spiritual refreshment, and it serves as our social center. It is where we learn politics. Man, some of the fight that used to go in that little backward political fight, little backward country church I grew up in, would put the Senate and Congress in Washington to shame. You know? And these were dudes that didn't have at most a second or third grade education. But talk about education, but parliamentary procedure, okay? And the place where our children come. You know, we can't throw these things away. No people. We can't say, oh, I want to survive with my culture, and then run like the Dickens trying to attach ourselves to somebody else. That's crazy. We got something. It came out of our struggle, our pain. Remember, they didn't even want us to have a church in the beginning. I gave you the quote from the dude who preached to the sermon of slaves, telling them, you know, obey your masters, and, you know, if you catch anybody doing. Black church is not about that. This lecture that I give here, I go to Dorchester Church, I say anything I want to say within the realm of decent respect. Why? Because this is mine. The only people who are my bosses are you. Think about it. Nobody can tell me yea or nay but you. And that's a part of me. I come here and I'm home. Now when I used to do a series of lectures for Black History Month in Riverside Church. I did it for 4 years. And the folks got very upset. Each year they got more and more upset. I don't know why. Because I'm a very, congenial kind of a person. You know, I always try to get along with folks, you know what I'm saying? But every year I can see, now Riverside Church, you know, it's got a sprinkling of us in there, you know. And since we were outnumbered, I used to see some of the brothers and sisters sitting back there cringing when they see me come in. Oh, God, there he is again. Y'all need to come, y'all. What are you going to be saying today? I kid you not. Some of them would get up and walk out before I could get to the podium. But they wouldn't, now they didn't have to come in. But you know how we do. We have to make sure that the person know that we disapprove of them. So they sit there until I get to the podium, and before I go, they all jump up and walk out. You know? One old lady used to do that thing like my grandma used to do, them hand akimbo. Look at me like that. You know? Some of them would just look at me and go, but them Anglo-Saxons who run that church, after all, it's Rockefeller's money there, right? You know, they don't play that. You know, this one day a guy says, what was the guy's name? Tristram, what's that dude? What's that guy's name that was pastor of that church yesterday? And you went there. That guy was pastor of Riverside Church. Coffin! Yeah, Sloan Coffin. Called me into his study. And man, all that oak and stuff, I was very impressed. You know, so you're the eminent Dr. Mackey. I says, no, sir, not today. I don't profess no titles on Sunday, y'all. That's the Lord's day. No, sir, not me. I've been hearing some interesting things about you. The minute they tell you interesting things, you say, yeah, right? We don't feel that our funds or whatnot, you know. But don't call us, we'll call you. Of course. You know what happened? Them rich dudes who stand up and do the ushering in them pinstripe suits and the cutaway coats. You know, because that's the way they do that. And the way they do that in St. Thomas Episcopal. You know, you don't dare say amen in one of them churches. You know, they give you looks that'll kill you. You know, you say amen, huh? And you don't do that. Sacrilege. Africanized in this here church. The result is the last 3 years I haven't been there. But see what happens? I'm here. See? Y'all see that ugly old lady sitting over there?
Which one?
That coconut lady over there. Well, she ain't really cook. She come from Suriname. Her and her daughter Laverne. They didn't bring their narrow selves all the way from New Jersey, and she's sick, to come over here to hear me. He's a student and a friend. Miss Reed, Miss Laverne, y'all stand up and ladies say good to him, right? Thank you. That's okay. Don't steal my thunder. You can sit now. It's enough. Miss Walker, if you... Any other? Oh, man, I'm going home. I'm tired now. See, just like my church, I can say, what do you want, sir? No problem. But that's not their fault. That's ours. Let me say to you this, and it's an important question. Every ethnic group in the United States of America, first of all, is not one nation. It's at least 9. Think about that. There's at least 9 that come together, some of them, sometime for certain things. We need to look at what the society is, rather than what people are telling us is. We all know it's not been a melting pot. And what I mean by this, every ethnic group in this society has its own agenda and its own thing. They go in, they look upon corporate America, the workplace, more or less as neutral territory, so to speak. You follow what I'm saying? Each group goes out there, and they go with their sword, they do battle, they try to get as much as they can and take it back to their own community. And what that means, there's no question about it, it means it calls for dual roles, a duality on the part of us. But that has always been. our role in the society, of having many faces to show. The problem, I think, has been with the younger people like yourself, not necessarily, is that too many of you have bought the idea that because you get the job or title, that therefore you're a part of the system. You follow what I'm saying? And tend to forget that this is only a facade. So what I'm suggesting, when you walk in there in the morning, you put on that Oxonian, Cambridgian prayer. Hello there, sir. You know, your preface, you know, come on, right? And you sit and you play that game. You go, if you're part of the lower echelon of middle management, you walk in and you're playing that game. You sit up in those conference rooms, you play that game. When that bell ring or whatever it was, when you walk off that golf course, you put on your African hat and you come home. The Scots do it. Let me give you an example. Some of you may have remembered Mike Quill. Right? He was the leader of the Transit Workers Union. Now, it's interesting about how we parallel. At one time, the Transit Workers Union was 99 and 100% Irish Catholic. But a lot of Protestant Irish there too, right? Mike Quill was probably one of the most erudite and sophisticated men that you ever wanted to see. Okay? This dude could sound like he just stepped out of Harvard or Yale or Oxford. None of his workers ever heard that side of Mike Quill. When Mike Quill walked out, it was, well, now, I'll tell you what it's going to do here, right? I'll meet you for the bar. We're talking about the ticket here. And I was working in labor, and he would slide in and out at you. Follow what I'm saying? He just slide in and out as necessary. As far as those Irish, and they gave us Hades. I'm learning. I have a friend, Mr. Sterling Johnson. I mean, it ain't been that long ago, who was the first black motorman that was ever hired by the New York City Transit. And I see him for lunch usually at least 2 or 3 times a week, and he tells a story that on his first run was the BMT, where he went from the inn in Brooklyn all the way to 57th Street and back and didn't pick up a passenger. That's right. So when he pulled into 42nd Street, says a little white boy about 6 or 7 years old said, standing on the platform, says, Mama, look, a nigga done stole the train. I mean, that's an actual fact. So we're not talking ancient history here. And I think for you younger people, listen, you've got to learn to be cunning. Now, maybe I shouldn't say this in church, but I'm talking about survival. And I mean cunning in a positive sense. You have got to learn to put your wits about you. You've got to learn to look that dude in the eye and handle the stuff. You go down the jargon. I know, I've done it. As long as you don't forget who you are. And if you forget, somewhere down the road, they'll remind you. Sorry, sir? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. No problem. No problem. I know this, but you always have options. You have choices. And you always have to ask yourself this question, or you should ask yourself this question. You don't have to do anything I tell you to do. By me responding, will this help or hinder the situation? You follow what I'm saying? You might challenge the discrimination against the brother or sister, and everybody gets iced. I didn't tell you there was no easy solution, son, did I? So you have to weigh, you understand what I'm saying? And then there are brothers and sisters that you might put yourself on the bottom. They look at you and say, hey, you a fool because I wouldn't have done it for you. So, and I said, when I said being cunning, and I understand now how I have dealt with these situations. First, it's always good, if you're lucky, to have something that they need more than you need them. Because that gives you the edge. And a lot of situations in my life, I was in that, and you got to know the difference, by the way. Now, many times, you find that many of us like to delude ourselves. We don't even like to admit that we are being discriminated when we are being discriminated against. So the conscious raising level, the pulling of coats, constantly has to go on. But if you feel in a situation that by sacrificing your position, and this is what I'm saying, that you can therefore move the cause ahead, then you might consider doing it. But if you just sacrifice the position, the ego trip to say, hey, and them funny names that we like to use having to do with everybody, so-and-so, that does not necessarily solve the problem, and the person to do that keeps right on being discriminated against. So what I found, that in any situation, I always tried to evaluate it in terms of what was the true nature of my position in the situation. And I've always looked to the idea, I believe very strongly, that we shouldn't be looking for careers out there in the people cooperative world. You take the job with the idea at some point to begin to get expertise and move on to something else, because we'll never make it by depending on these people for jobs, no matter how they treat us. At some point. And of course, again, you see, you're in a bind because we don't do all the things that we should do. The Koreans, now, if you go to 36th Street and Broadway, they bought a whole big 30-story office building there. They got a Korean-American bank there. Walk by there sometime, right where Macy's, crossing Macy's to be. And you look in the ground floor and you don't see nobody in there but Korean. And if you walk in and say, hey, will y'all give me a job? Yeah, I'm an equal opportunity employer. Do you speak Korean? But who put them there? We did. Because it is us. There ain't enough Koreans out our neighborhood to support them Korean greengrocers. We do. There's a Caribbean brother that opened up a very nice fish market and vegetable market on Snowstorm Avenue here about 9 months ago. And he can hardly make ends meet. Our folks walk by him and go 5 blocks down to go to the Korean. We have to begin to deal with those motes in our own eyes, because if we don't, and when we have done this and have our own economic base, you find that a whole lot of that humiliation that happens in the white corporate world will go, just like Cardinal O'Connor is now saying, oh, the Irish and the blacks had the same kind of struggle. Only when we make it do it. Yes, sir.
Do you find that at this point in time in our struggle that I'm a grandmother. I have tried to set my son in college like I went to college.
Uh-huh.
And now he has a child. What kind, at this point in time in our lives, we don't have anything to leave to our children in terms of what they can strive for.
We
Wanting their lives, my mother wanted my life to be better than my father and her life. I wanted my son's life to be better than my life. Now, my grandchildren, what do they have to aspire for? I'm saying at this point,
in terms of destiny,
where are they going?
all we can do at any point in time, and this is the thing, destiny, we do the things that we know within ourselves as a community person. We structure them to the best way we can. We can't go down the road and predetermine, you follow what I'm saying, what they will do. I mean, your mother, for example, she prepared you to the best she and their family could.
But there was no way that she could jump ahead down where you are now and lead you through to make sure that what she hoped for you happened. That is not possible. The only thing that any generation can do, which is I think why we're here, part of why we're here, is to try to do those things that are positive for our children and those around us, hoping that if we have planted the right seeds and they have within them the stuff and the support, that they will rise to the occasion. But the problem is there for every generation. There is never a time when you'll be able to say, well, okay, we've got it made. Look at the people who run the system, who plague us. Analyze them. Are they happy? They've got, this is the most powerful nation in the world. Are they happy? They're constantly looking for enemies. They constantly feel themselves threatened. They've got mansions and holes and whatnot, and yet they're envious of us who got nothing. Shouldn't we learn something from that? We do what we can to try, as in my view, I'm not telling you what to do because your children are not mine, but we do what we can to try to structure them to be positive human beings, true to their race, have their dignity. And if there's enough support to happen, they will rise to the occasion and maybe even go further than we have. But we can't walk with them down the road, and maybe it would be nice if we could. But that ain't the way it goes. It don't be that way. You know, this is why I always think it's asinine when I see people my age, men and women, that are walking around with a whole lot of paint and powder and all these things and saying, oh yes, people think I look like my daughter or my son. The time for you to be young is when you're young. The time for all things, the season. And if I am going